Now the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. And the angel said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And when Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. Joseph took his wife, but knew her not, until she had borne a son, and Joseph named him Jesus. So writes Matthew in the first chapter of his first-century gospel about Jesus of Nazareth, leaving no question that Joseph became for Mary her real earthly husband, and for Jesus his real earthly father. Clear as it is in Matthew, as well as the other early Christian Gospels of Luke and John, that many early Christians believed Joseph was the real earthly father of Jesus, not all comprehended the importance and significance of Joseph. In fact, it is the case that in the history of Christianity, the Christians have seen and perceived Joseph in very different ways. Some Christians, as we have seen in the images shown thus far, have recognized the significance of Joseph and seen him in a very positive light. Relying upon the testimony of the earliest Christian Gospels, they have emphasized the importance of his position in the Holy Family. Others, in contrast, under the influence of other later texts and ideas, have distorted these earliest gospel accounts, as we will discover in later lectures in this series. But today, in our first lecture, we want to examine several artistic works from the period of early Christian art to the Baroque era, that both represent Joseph as a positive figure and affirm his representations in Matthew, Luke, and John, and consequently the roles Joseph exercised in his relationships with both Mary and Jesus. In this first image, a 4th century carving of a sarcophagus fragment from a large Christian sarcophagus, we see the work of an artist who understood the significance of Joseph's role in the Christian salvation story. Created in the 4th century by a Gaelic carver, this stone carving portrays both the events of the first dream of Joseph and the annunciation and instruction given to him, as well as the marriage of Joseph and Mary. On the left side of the composition, we see Joseph asleep on a stone, caught up in his dreams, while a large angel, the messenger of God, stands beside him and speaks to him, and tells him, among other things, to take Mary as his wife. Thus, not surprisingly, on the right side of the composition, we see Joseph's response to the angel's message. We see a portrayal of Joseph marrying Mary. In this second image, a carved ivory plaque created in the mid-6th century, perhaps by a Byzantine artist, we find another work that exemplifies the importance of Joseph. It recounts two events: Joseph's first dream and Joseph's and Mary's journey to Bethlehem. Here we see further affirmation of Joseph's commitment to take Mary as his wife and to love her and her child. In the lower half of this image, the carver shows Joseph holding Mary while she rides side saddle on their journey to Bethlehem. It is a very intimate and loving composition, indicative of the couple's care for each other. With his left arm around her and his right hand on her knee, Joseph holds Mary very close to him. Mary, in turn, demonstrates her love and need of Joseph by putting her right arm around his neck. Carved for the Cathedral of Archbishop Maximianus of Ravenna, pictured here, this ivory plaque is one of several found on this larger work that detail the roles of Joseph in the birth and infancy of Jesus. Substantiation of a deep respect for Joseph is also manifest in this next composition, a 13th century stone relief by an unknown French sculptor of the Holy Family, from the rood screen of the cathedral crypt of the cathedral in Chartres. In this exquisite work of art, the sculptor has created a truly familial portrayal in which the father and mother of the newborn child appear to move lovingly in unison, Mary gently touching her baby, while at the same time Joseph slowly covers his wife with a blanket. In the process, the artist manifests the tenderness and care of both, who have been joined together by the mysterious and evocative birth of Jesus. Similarly, Joseph is given a central role in this next composition, for in this portrayal, which is also very familial, the artist has placed all three members of the family close together at a kitchen table. Created by the Dutch painter Jan Mostart at the end of the 15th century, this work, The Holy Family at Supper, clearly affirms the significance of Joseph within the Holy Family. In this striking composition, the artist lets us see Joseph cutting bread for his family as Mary feeds the child Jesus. At the same time, he shows us that while Mary is holding Jesus, the child is watching Joseph and appears quite intrigued by his father's actions, an intrigue which in turn seems to elicit an ever-slight smile from Joseph. Joseph's importance can also be seen in this amazingly light-spirited work of The Rest on the Flight by Federica Barocci, created around 1570. Here we see Joseph and the young child Jesus playing and laughing with each other, while Mary calmly focuses on her own concerns. It is worth noting that this painting by Barocci was so popular that it was copied by the famous Dutch engraver Cornelius Cort, as well as by other contemporary engravers. Here we see an example of the engraving by Cort. The special relationship between Joseph and Jesus is also portrayed in this image by the Spanish artist El Greco, painted at the end of the 16th century. While there is an air of somberness and even sorrow suggested in the faces and postures of Mary and Mary Magdalene, the painter pushes the viewer beyond this perception with his representation of Joseph's engagement with the child Jesus. Although held securely in the lap of his mother, the artist shows us that Jesus' attention is clearly focused on the face of his Father, who holds a large bowl from which Jesus partakes fruit. The special nature and character of Joseph's fatherhood is also affirmed in this striking and elongated portrayal, also by El Greco, of Joseph and Jesus with the angels, likely composed as well at the end of the 16th century. In this image, the Spanish painter presents Joseph as a towering figure who, with his outstretched left arm and hand, lovingly protects his young son from the dark clouds of the world. In turn, Jesus, knowing his need for Joseph's protection and care, tightly grasps his father around his waist. All of these images show viewers that Joseph did as the angel of God had instructed him in his first dream and annunciation. He obeyed the commands of God in his relationship to Mary and the child she was to bear. Thus, by following the commands of God, by taking each of these steps, as the writer of the Gospel of Matthew recounts, Joseph formally declared that Mary was his wife and Jesus was his son, and demonstrated that he had been called to play a critical role in the life and story of Jesus of Nazareth. And yet, curiously, few people seem aware of the positive ways Joseph is portrayed in the earliest Christian Gospels, and even fewer appear to have reflected upon the significance and importance Joseph must have had in the life of Jesus, as many of our own modern cultural records show, and as can be substantiated in a simple count of the number of Christmas cards each year that picture only a mother and child, only Mary and Jesus. If Joseph appears on a card, he is often represented as an elderly man who does not appear completely comfortable about being where he is, as someone who is present but disengaged, as if to suggest that his time with Mary and Jesus will be very limited. We see this in this present painting, a composition of the Holy Family created in the last third of the 15th century by the German artist Martin Schongauer. Here Joseph is portrayed as a very elderly figure and set some distance from Mary and Jesus. Typically, Joseph was represented in this fashion. Other times, as we see in the present image, he was even represented as a buffoonish and diminutive figure. This can be seen in the early 15th century drawing on paper of the Adoration of the Magi for a Book of Hours created by an unknown Dutch artist. Here we see Joseph located in the lower right corner of the image, and he is represented as a diminutive childlike figure, who in fact bears very little relevance to the event of the Adoration of the Magi. Unfortunately, many artists in the medieval and Renaissance periods represented Joseph as these two artists. So, to put the issues into questions, is it not reasonable to ask first, why is it the case that so few people seem aware of the significant and positive ways Joseph is portrayed in the earliest Christian Gospels? And second, why is it the case that so few people seem to have contemplated the role Joseph must have played in the life of Jesus? Certainly part of the answer may be found in the fact that specific doctrines of the Christian Church, particularly those which have bestowed so many spiritual accolades upon Mary, have inhibited most Christians from looking more closely at the figure of Joseph and recognizing the important roles he played in the life of Jesus in the earliest Gospels. At the same time, another part of the answer may be attributed to the curious but remarkable fact that even Christian scholars have tended to concentrate on the figures of Mary and Jesus in their study of the Christian Gospels as well as later Christian literature. As a result, they have often not acknowledged and reflected upon the innumerable portrayals of Joseph in centuries of Christian literature. But Christian scholars are not alone in this regard. For the lack of recognition of the significance of Joseph in the early Christian narratives and in later Christian literature and also Christian art can be documented in the work of other scholars as well, including literary specialists, cultural historians, and art historians, who in scores upon scores of studies and monographs have often overlooked or ignored the portrayals of Joseph while seriously contemplating those of Mary and Jesus. Certainly, the artistic images we have seen of Joseph in this first lecture indicate that some people and artists have recognized Joseph's significance and honored his roles in the story of the birth and life of Jesus of Nazareth. But others indeed, many, have not acknowledged Joseph's importance. This leaves us with two historical questions that we must answer. First, why did some acknowledge Joseph's importance and others did not? Second, what were the factors that led to these different perspectives, and even to this day shape the perception of many? Two questions that must and will be answered in this series of lectures on the other person in the picture, the portrayal and interpretation of Joseph the carpenter.